jump right into Jill Hollander with talking about submitting your grant applications and how to get the very best things added to that. So Jill, with no further ado, I will turn it over to you, and you should have the ability to screen share.
Okay, thank you. Let's share here. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about 16 tips and tricks for grant writing and how to get your application to the top. I'll give you a little bit of my background. Most recently, I was the K-12 Director of Curriculum, Instruction, Professional Development, and Technology for a district here close to Dayton. I've also been a VP of Education for an ed tech company, a curriculum manager, an instructor. I'm doing a lot of educational consulting right now and coaching, especially for aspiring administrators. And then most relevant to this presentation, I was a board member. I was the secretary on a community foundation board where I approved grants for about 400 educators, small businesses in the community, and then also nonprofits. And I've done similar work in Cincinnati and approved grants for about 900 educators there. And then I've also written grants for about the past 15 to 20 years. So I did that when I was over college and career readiness for about 70 schools in Cincinnati. I've done it for about 10 schools in the Dayton area in the areas of ed tech, health services and food services, and then also for about 20 plus schools in the Chicagoland area. So just to get to know who's in the audience, if you could all participate in a waterfall chat, go ahead and load my chat up with your title, your organization, and then I'd like you to rate your grant writing skills from about a 1 to a 10, just so I can see where everybody's at before I present. Okay, good. That gives me an idea. Okay, so like I said, today we'll talk about 16 tips for getting your grant application to the top. And then I'll also go over all my contact information if you have questions afterwards. Okay, so my number one tip is timing. Timing is everything. One of the largest grants I was ever awarded, it was millions and millions of dollars for ed tech resources. I received because of the timeliness of how we submitted it. So definitely take timing into consideration. And then as a grant approver, I know that decision makers act pretty quickly. So getting them in right when the grant opens is a great idea. Simply because if we have 500 grants to go over in 2 weeks, we start looking at those right as they start coming in. And we're usually comparing those first quickly submitted grants to all the rest. So get them in as quickly as you can once that opens. And then something else to keep in mind with timing and decision makers, usually it's not their full-time job to read grants. So reading and scoring takes a lot of time. So if it's not a person's full-time job, making sure that you're getting those in early is even more important. And then also in terms of timeliness, think about your responses. If the approver is asking for clarifying questions, usually I would have a stack of grants I had clarifying questions for, and if I didn't receive a response within about 24 hours, I would definitely put those in the rejection pile. So making sure that you respond quickly and getting those in right when the grant opens is important. So know your audience and decision makers too. On the board that I served on, there were 8 board members, but really only two true decision makers. So one was me, and that was to look at the content and make sure that was all correct and accurate. And then the other person knew more of the political background and the ideas of the board because they had served on the board for about 20 years. So know who the true decision makers are. It's usually not everybody on the board or on the committee. You can look at their past decisions, look at grants that they've approved in the past and make sure yours is in alignment with what they typically approve. And also know which other organizations they work with. So I was on a foundation board, but we also spoke to other nonprofits and other grant approvers. And, we always switch notes and say, are you thinking about approving this grant? Are you thinking about funding this project? And that's important because you don't want to have 2 wildly different proposals for 2 organizations that talk to each other. And then also review feedback from previous submissions if possible. The foundation that I worked on, we had the same grants often submitted year after year. So just take that feedback that you get from previous submissions, and then concentrate on what the specific audience needs to know. I know that you'll read in a lot of textbooks that it's not good to use jargon, but know that peers are generally the ones who are reading and scoring the grants. So for example, if you're submitting to the Department of Education, you will have educators reading and scoring those. And then same with Department of Justice, you would have law enforcement personnel reading those. So I think it's okay to use vocabulary and use content-specific terms. Just make sure that you're using those knowledgeably. Okay, tip number 3 is have good accountability measures. I'll give you one example of a grant that I was really excited to fund, and then it ended up being rejected in the end, and that was because of accountability. So I had a teacher with great ideas and a coordinator with great ideas. This was during COVID, and they wanted to have students come in and use math manipulatives and a lot of tactile resources for students who had sensory issues. So they spent maybe 3 months working on the perfect proposal. They asked clarifying questions. They double checked things with me prior to submitting. It was an awesome grant. It was going to make a great difference for all these students. And then last minute, they changed it and said, instead of students coming in and using these manipulatives and using these tactile resources, they were making take-home kits. And for me, that's a huge accountability issue. We couldn't measure the minutes that students were using these, and we couldn't verify that there were professionals monitoring usage in an efficient way. So that's one example of a great grant gone wrong because of accountability measures. So if you can make sure that anything that's being done is being done in person, where someone can track it, that's great. Make sure that it's data-driven. And then also know who's responsible from the providing organization for their accountability measures. Who's coming in and checking? What's their method of checking your accountability measures? Those can make a huge difference. And if you're applying with the state or applying with the government, it's usually the same people that come back time after time. So if you can figure out who that is, that's always a good thing. And you've probably worked with them in the past if it's someone from a state agency. Okay, tip number 4 is to be media ready. Storytelling is a big part of grant writing, believe it or not, and it only takes a few sentences. So one example I have of this is a gifted teacher who applied for a grant to involve more students in STEM education. So she had a great story. She had a couple students in 4th and 5th grade who didn't identify as gifted, but they had a great interest in STEM and all the gifted STEM activities that she was doing. So one year she kind of piloted it and tried to get a couple kids who didn't identify into the program. And of course, they loved it. It helped them succeed in STEM. They ended up being STEM leaders in their school and running a STEM club. It was in the newspaper. And so her grant focused on expanding it to gifted students and students who didn't identify as gifted for all of 4th and 5th grade. And then year after year, she would expand that even more. So her story really stuck with the board, it stuck with the community, and it received a ton of media attention. So storytelling is always a good thing. I know that you'll read too, not to make your application too lengthy, but you can really storytell in just a couple of sentences and it makes yours memorable. Know how you'll share amazing news related to the accomplishments from the grant funds as well. When I was working with an ed tech company in Dallas, we had a grant through General Motors, and they definitely wanted pictures and they wanted events that showed that they gave back to the community. They wanted it for their newsletters, for local papers in Arlington. And so we had the big check ceremony with students involved and employees from GM. So know how you'll share that news. And if you have pictures or newspaper articles or anything from previous grants you've written, those are always good to include as well. And then sharing example marketing materials is also very beneficial. So I always talked about one-pagers, just a one-page document that you can attach showing what the objective is, the goals of your grant, and how you'll share that with parents in the community. So if you have any marketing materials, don't be afraid to share those. And then tip number 5, your expertise is definitely important. Know and share your purpose. Talk about any previous experience you have as a content expert in that area, and know what makes you different from other applicants. So if you're really, really good at something and you're leading committees or you're leading groups, make sure that you include that in your application. And then letters of support are always good to get from others who have expertise in that specific area. A lot of times these are kind of an afterthought, but letters of support from other experts can be really important. And then also I didn't mention, but when you're marketing too, make sure that you're creative, and this comes in with expertise as well. Be creative with your names, the events, the event names, the titles. Use acronyms that helps the approvers remember yours specifically. Just make sure your acronyms are easy to remember. And then also with your expertise, show what you've shared so far professionally on professional sites or social media accounts like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, things of that nature. And then also I'll mention too, so your expertise is important. And I think a lot of times we forget to highlight that your strengths as a professional will really help you improve the organization, improve the organization's clients. So don't forget to make that a focus. And then also with your expertise, I would say don't just apply for a grant because you know you can get it and that's your specialty area. Really ensure that it meets your objectives and your goals and aligns with your background, because any initial monetary benefit, it'll never outweigh the time you put in later, and also the impact that it has on your reputation as a professional. So know your expertise and stick to it.
I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
First of all, a great example of a memorable acronym was from Arkansas, right? They had the LEARNS Act. And what a fantastic name that really drives home the point of what we're looking for, specific to what you just mentioned. My question for you is, however, is it possible to dig through these last 10 in the next session where you have plenty more time to really get in and keep giving these great examples so that we can move on to Luke, and I will make sure that you have ample time. And this will be a wetting of the whistle, if you will.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.